Well, hello everybody. Today my topic is entitled IFB Cults of Personality. And I want to welcome you to my channel. This is Angel Michael. Excuse me for being away on such a long hiatus. I haven't been involved on this channel for a while, for about 4 months. I have another channel which I make animated movies, which is also part of my business. I've been learning several different types of animation software. One in particular is called Poser. Allows you to create more realistic human figures. Well, anyway, that has kept me busy, so I haven't had time to post videos. The reason I decided to post today is because I was browsing around on my Angel Michael channel instead of my animation channel, and I saw a link for a new video by IFB pastor. In case you don't know what IFB stands for, that is Independent Fundamental Baptist. Well, anyway, Stephen Anderson is an IFB pastor, and his latest video, which was posted on June the 9th, is entitled The Blessing of Marriage, Being Single, MGTOW, and about the Catholic Church. Anyway, the reason why I decided to talk about him, and I also want to talk about Jones University, and I'll give you several reasons why in a few minutes. I can call that Pastor Anderson, as well as Bob Jones, a cult of personality. Well, first of all, I think I mentioned this on other videos, but I'm Southern Baptist. But the reason I know about Bob Jones is because I went there 30 years ago to an IFB college in South Carolina, Bob Jones University. I went there for 4 years, received a 4-year BA degree in art. While I believe I received a good education, the school was not accredited, and I, as many other young people, had a hard time getting accepted into other schools for advanced degrees because BJU is not accredited with the state. BJU does now have some type of limited accreditation through a private college system. I think young people are having a bit easier time today than they did when I graduated back in 1988. The reason, of course, BJU didn't want accreditation was because the state has certain rules and regulations they place on schools and colleges that the school didn't like or agree with. That included like forcing them to accept homosexuals or atheists and other subversive people or individuals from teaching in their school or working there in some capacity or even attending college there. You get the idea. They didn't want the state involved in anything. And they also don't accept any kind of scholarship from or financial aid from the government. Okay, so let's get back to why I think BJU and Anderson is a cult. Or more precisely, I call it a cult of personality. Well, first of all, let's look at the definition of what a cult actually is. A noun. The word cult is a noun. A system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object. Example, the cult of Saint Olaf. A relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. And of course that could be Satan worshiping cult as well. Synonyms: sect, religious group, denomination, religious order, church faith, community, belief, persuasion, affiliation, etc. Number 2, misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing, hence a cult of personality surrounding the leader. That would be like an obsession with or fixation or mania for passion for this person or object. Or even in the secular world, veneration or reverence, for example, for the cult of youth or beauty in Hollywood. That, to me, is a cult as well. Here are some examples of a cult of personality I copied from the Guardian website, which, as you know, is a liberal website, but they sometimes have some good articles. Number 1 is a charismatic leader who increasingly becomes an object of worship as the general principles that may have originally sustained the group to stay in power or to lose power That is a live-in leader who has no meaningful accountability and becomes the single most defining element of the group and its source of power and authority. Now, when I get through this list, I go back and explain why I believe Bob Jones and Anderson may or may not fit these criteria. Number 2 is indoctrination or education is in use that can be seen as coercive, persuasive thought, or we also call brainwashing. The culmination of this process can be seen by members of the group often doing things that are not in their own best interests, but consistently in the best interests of the group and the leader, or organization, whatever. Okay, number 3 is economic, sexual, and or exploitation of group members by the leader and the ruling leadership. The destructiveness of groups called cults varies by degree from labor violations, child abuse, medical neglect. In some extreme and isolated situations, there are calls for mass violence or suicide, which, if you remember correctly, a group that was considered a cult and had a problem with mass suicide was the Jonestown cult years ago in Guyana. Of course, I found out later that the guy was a CIA operative, so there's some weird stuff going on there. Some groups that were once seen as cults have historically evolved into becoming generally regarded as religions. Power developed from a single leader to a broader church government, and such groups ceased to be seen as simply personality-driven and defined by a single individual. For example, is the Seventh-day Adventists, led by Ellen White, or another group, the Mormon Church, founded by Joseph Smith. Some groups may not fit the definition of a cult, but may pose potential risks for participants. And here are the 10 warning signs of a potentially unsafe group or leader. I would like to state here that I do not believe that Bob Jones nor many of the churches, including Pastor Stephen Anderson's church, is actually considered a cult, but it is a potential risk to individuals because of the 10 warning signs of unsafe groups or leadership that I'm about to define for you. So these people I consider to be dangerous and possibly people that you want to avoid, or organizations you want to avoid, but they don't meet the traditional sense of a cult because they, especially for number 3, the economic, sexual, or exploitation of group members, I don't think any of these do that, but if they are some, then they are a cult. I consider Bob Jones and Anderson's group to be cult-like, but not in a traditional sense, cult. Bob Jones and Anderson's church is definitely a cult of personality because there is somebody in charge who has the personality. The personality in charge at Anderson's church, of course, is Stephen Anderson. And a lot of the IFB churches, the cult of personality would be the pastor, or in the case of Bob Jones University, would be the leadership. And there is definitely a veneration of Bob Jones, even though he's been dead for years. Now, we'll be stating the 10 warning signs of a potentially unsafe church, group, or leader as the following. 1 is the absolute authoritarianism without meaningful accountability. Number 2 would be no tolerance for questions of critical inquiry about beliefs of the group, organization, cult, or whatever. Number 3, no meaningful financial disclosure regarding budgets or expenses, such as independent audited financial statements. Number 4 would be unreasonable fear about the outside world, such as impending catastrophe, evil conspiracies, and persecutions. Number 5, there is no legitimate reason to leave. Former followers are always wrong and leave in negative or even evil, considered to be evil by the leader or the group. Number 6, former members often relate the same stories of abuse and reflect a similar pattern of grievances towards the leader and the group. 7. There are records, books, news articles, or broadcast reports that document the abuse of the leader or group. Number 8. Followers feel they can never be good enough. 9. The group leader is always right. And 10. The group leader is the exclusive means of knowing truth or receiving validation. No other process of discovery is really acceptable or credible. Okay, so let's go back and go through each one of these. I think many IFB pastors and churches and organizations or colleges, like Bob Jones, for instance, fit into many of these categories. I also throw in Pastor Stephen Anderson of Faithful Baptist Church of Phoenix, Arizona, since he is on the internet a lot and a lot of people are talking about him. I put him in this group as well. I will go through each one of the above mentioned examples of the cult of personality to prove which one or how many of these that Stephen Anderson and Bob Jones fit. Should be interesting. Okay, let's go back to the first one here. The first one of these groups, number 1, was absolute authoritarianism without meaningful accountability. Well, Bob Jones meets this criteria, and sounded like Stephen Anderson meets this as well. And the reason I say that is because I went to Bob Jones, so I know. It is definitely a cult of personality because even though it's a Christian school, there is more programs and more things that they spent time talking about Bob Jones instead of talking about Jesus Christ. As a Christian, we're supposed to, Christian group, organization, or church, we should be uplifting Jesus, not a man, not the pastor, not somebody in the church, but Jesus Christ. And that's all they were doing all the time I was there. And to me, they were preaching nothing but Pharisaical type. You know, you had to live by these rules. It was Judaism, basically, is what it was. Same argument you can get for talking about the Roman Catholics. You had to follow a set of rules, and not that we shouldn't follow rules, but that doesn't get us. We are not saved by our following rules. We are saved by accepting Jesus into our heart. And the school was very legalistic. The legalism was ridiculous. They were just like the Judaizers in the Bible. It sounded to me like Stephen Anderson is the same way. I've heard a lot of his videos, a lot of complaints of different people that say that he's a Judaizer. That is his way or the highway. And Bob Jones was the same way. You know, they don't like the idea if you were disagree with them. They don't want to hear it. I remember I was in a chapel service one time, and I don't even remember what the one of the Bobs was speaking, what he was talking about, but some guy stood up. I don't know if he was a student or a visitor, but he said, "You are preaching legalism." Well, the ushers quickly came down, grabbed the young man, and dragged his behind out of the we call it the amphitheater, which was just a big meeting room. But I have heard stories that Stephen Anderson and his group did that as well. They didn't allow people to have an opinion. If you didn't agree with him, they'd kick you out. I guarantee that was a student, he was probably gone. They had packed his bags and they sent him home. Okay, number 2, no tolerance for questions or critical inquiry. I sort of already been over that. I met that a lot. I didn't question directly, and while I was there, I talked to some, different teachers or whatever, and they didn't always agree. But I guarantee if they spoke in public and made their questions known, they probably would get fired. So Bob Jones and Stephen Anderson meet this criteria as well. Number 3, no meaningful financial disclosure regarding budgets or expenses, such as independent audited financial statement. Well, I don't know about Stephen Anderson, whether he allows people to see his budget or expenses. Most churches usually have a business meeting and they pass around the budget information. I don't know about that, and I don't think that Bob Jones would keep their financial information private either. Of course, I wasn't a member of the church either, so, but anyway, I don't think that neither one meets that criteria. Number 4, unreasonable fear about the outside world, such as impending catastrophe, evil conspiracies, and persecution. Well, both BJU and Steven Anderson fall into this category. Both of them are obsessed with catastrophe. I mean, not that there's some things I may agree with Anderson about the New World Order and stuff like that, but I think he's like obsessed with some of those things. And Bob Jones, somewhat, maybe not fully in that category, but they did obsess over some impending disasters and conspiracies. Okay, number 5, there is no legitimate reason to leave. Former followers are always wrong and leaving negative or considered to be evil. Well, I do know that Bob Jones, once they kick people out, they usually don't allow them back. And they definitely consider them to be bad people. And I understand that Steven Anderson has done the same thing. I know I've heard some really nasty comments from not just from him, but from other people of his church when people have been kicked out. They really attack that person and consider them to be evil for questioning and for being kicked out for whatever reason. There are quite a few videos about that. Okay, number 7, there are records, books, news articles, broadcast reports that document the abuses of the group or leader. Well, BJU most definitely falls in this area, because I know the sexual abuse scandal at BJU back in 2012 was a big deal. It was in the news, and I haven't been back to BJU since like early 2000s, and I really have very little contact. I get emails from time to time, but the only reason I found out is because I was doing a Google search, just curious what was going on, and I found out about the sexual abuse scandal that went on in 2012. That was really nasty, really bad. And I didn't have time to go through all that mess, but because I don't remember anything like that ever happening when I was there. A young man accused of raping. There's several different cases of it. Raping a boy, college boy, and some young ladies. And the school covered it up, and nothing was ever done about it. Now, whether or not anything like that has happened at Anderson's church, I don't know. But I do know that there are articles and lots of different videos about being bullied. People are being bullied at his church that don't agree with him. It's not a Christian attitude to bully people. Apostle Paul tells us that we should all get along. We should all be able to be, as adults, be able to convey different viewpoints without being abusive towards each other. And Anderson just does not seem to care about being kind like he's supposed to. You don't be abusive to people because you don't agree with them. Don't kick them out just because they have a different viewpoint. As an adult, we should be able to get along and be able to say, well, let's agree to disagree. But he's the type of person that he's just a maniacal maniac. He's one of these people that think like, well, it's my way or the highway. This is my church. You do what I say. And that's just not the way things are to be done. Pastor is not a dictator. Jesus was not a dictator. They should follow Jesus' example, and they certainly aren't doing it. Okay, number 8. Followers feel they can never be good enough. Well, BJU, both and Anderson, I think, fit that particular criteria. I think a lot of people at Bob Jones felt that way, that they were looked down on because they didn't dress a certain way or dress well enough to meet the standards of the school, or they weren't good enough. They weren't able, like I felt that way sometimes myself, because I didn't have time to go out and do these different activities the school expected us to do as a nice little Christian. And I was so busy with my schoolwork, I didn't have time to go out to these witness groups. We had groups that went out and did all kinds of nice things for people, which I think was great. But I just didn't have time, and people looked down on me, and that's not the way. The Lord does not expect us to, to do what we're not able to do. That's not a Christian, and we're not supposed to consider ourselves to be better than other people. And that was the kind of attitude a lot of these, what I call Bojoites, used to have. And Anderson's the same way. He thinks he's better, and some of his people think they're better than everybody else because look at me, I'm a better Christian than you because I did this, that, and the other. Well, so what? All of our wonderful things that we've done, God considers them to be nothing but garbage, dung. You can't get into heaven with that. That's works. Works don't get you into heaven. That's legalism. And yep, both BJU and Anderson fit that category. So you may ask, why am I attacking Pastor Anderson and Bob Jones University? Well, I see both as harmful to the church and young people. They're doing wrong and have done wrong as a Christian, and as a Christian brother, I have a right to call these people out for their wrongdoing. I only chose these two groups because I know more about them personally. Well, I'm sure there are many other groups I can call out, including the Roman Catholic Church, which there is ample proof of the abuses of that church. But I'm not Catholic, so I will reserve the right of another, more closely related and connected to the church, to bring attention to that organization. We are called to be witnesses for Christ, to teach and exhort others not to browbeat, hoard power over, allow abuses to go unchallenged within our own organization or church. It's not only illegal but immoral and wicked for a church or a church organization to allow immoral conduct to continue without said perpetrator be held accountable. And I'm referring to the abuses that go on in some of these churches. Not always do they occur from the pastor, but the other people in the church that's going on. But Ezekiel 34:1-10 gives God's critique of Israel's shepherds is communicated in following 10 ways, and you can go through all this yourself. And in chapter 34, verse 2, they feed themselves and not the sheep. They eat the fat. They clothe themselves with wool. They take care of themselves, that is. They slaughter the fat ones. In other words, just like the thieves and robbers Jesus mentions in John 10, these shepherds are stealing from the sheep for their own shameful gain. But there's more. They have not strengthened the weak. They have not healed the sick. They have not bound up the injured. They have not brought back those that stray. They have not sought the lost or witnessed to others. They have ruled with force and harshness. That definitely goes on at Bob Jones University. Okay, so I want to go just a little more in depth here, and I wanted to explain something. Now, the 10 different definitions of a cult that are listed here, I want to make sure you understand that these, the ones that were given by the Guardian website, are talking about potential risks for participants. Now, the first 3 that I mentioned, especially the third one, talks about economic, sexual, and exploitation of group members by the leader. Now, I don't know personally anybody at Bob Jones or at Anderson's church that specifically in power that's doing that. But I do know there were some students at Bob Jones that were caught, and they covered it up. And there's also information about some other IFB churches that I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to get into a lawsuit situation, but another church in particular that the pastor was accused, it's an IFB church, accused of sexual misconduct, and he had some kind of affiliation with Bob Jones. So there is going on in these churches. Now I'm saying that every single one in the church, no. I'm not blaming every church. I'm saying as Christian people, we should be watching out and be wary of pastors or people who claim to be pastors. You know, they're human beings too. We can't put these people on pedestals. They're human beings. They have flaws and problems. And ultimately, it's our job as individuals in the church to put a stop to inappropriate stuff that's going on, any kind of exploitation. Now, if this is going on in your church, you need to speak out about it. Either you will need to go to people that you trust and put it and force the pastor or leadership to resign. And if it's something sexual or abusive, physically abusive, you need to go to the police about it. Don't put up with this abuse. I don't care what kind of Bible verses they quote. There is not a single Bible verse that says that we are to put up with abusive people in power. I can quote you all kinds of verses about how you're supposed to take care of your flock, and if you're abusing your power that you have in the church over your congregation, you don't need to be a pastor. You need to find another job. And that's what some of these pastors need. They just need to resign and move on. But anyway, I wanted to go a little deeper in depth here of some situations that I know about. Number two, we're talking about the potential risks for participants or people involved in or who are in any of these churches or church groups or schools that you need to watch out for. When you send your children to schools, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, or a college, you should do your due diligence and check up on these people. What are other people saying about them? Find out if you can trust these people. If they're supposed to be Christians, especially if you send them to a Christian school, check up on them. You can go to the internet and find out all kinds of information about people, individuals and organizations. There is no excuse today to say, well, I didn't know. Well, you can check up on them on all kinds of different websites. And you can find out all kinds of information, whether they've been charged with a crime of any. You can find all that is public record, and all you have to do is go to particular websites, and I'll give that in a few minutes, that you can go check up on these people and find out if they have any legal charges pending against them. I would not send my child to a school where you have pedophiles or you have people that have been caught accused of abusing people and or whatnot, or people who steal money and things like that as well. Now this is something that I want to mention. Number 4. No, let's not do number 4. Number 5. There is no legitimate reason to leave. Former followers are always wrong in leaving, negative or evil. Now this one I mentioned, but the reason I want to mention this one is because Bob Jones had this problem of labeling people and telling them that they can't come back to school because they don't approve of their lifestyle, or or they're afraid they might stir up some bad feelings among their students. Like for instance, you would not be welcome to come back to the school as an alumnus if they know you're gay. You're not allowed to come back. I'm not saying that anything about that. I'm just saying that that's just a particular type of person that they would not allow to come back to the school. That somebody who's a political activist, who somebody that they disagree with, you have your own personal opinion, and if they disagree with it, they're not going to allow you to come there and speak or talk to people there. They'll probably usher you off campus. Now, personally, I don't want somebody. If I had a school, I wouldn't want somebody coming on campus and spreading, information that I don't agree with. However, there are certain ways about how you go about it, and I think there's a problem with the way a lot of these schools deal with that situation. You can do it without things escalating, and sometimes it can escalate. And I have a problem with people in power who are unable to and unwilling to change their position. If you're wrong, you need to be big enough to say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. Forgive me." But that's the problem with some of these IFB organizations and churches and pastors and schools. When they have been caught in wrong, they will not recant. They will not change their ways. They will basically kick people out and won't have anything to do with them. So that is a very unchristian attitude. Okay, let's see, another one here. Oh, this is important. Number 6, former members often relate the same stories of abuse and reflect a similar pattern of grievances. Now, I want to go a little more detailed. In 2012, I know that there was a sexual abuse case. Well, even when I was there, I didn't know of any sexual abuse that was going on, but I do know that there were people who were caught. Several students were kicked out for having sex on campus. Heterosexual couples were not allowed to come back for a year. They could come back like a year later if two people who were involved in a homosexual relationship were found out and they were kicked out of school. They were never allowed to come back. Nobody ever, if you're a Christian organization, you should be concerned about the well-being of your students. Make sure they understand. If you believe that homosexuality is wrong, you need to have some process of counseling students. There was no counseling at all at that school. You were caught in a situation, no counseling, you were just automatically kicked out and never allowed to come back. That's not a Christian way to deal with a situation like that. Personally, in my personal opinion, from my understanding of the Bible, homosexuality is wrong, but that's not how you go about dealing with a situation. You don't just kick somebody out of school and tell them, "We don't want you back." You need to have them go through counseling. If they agree to the rules that we don't believe in homosexuality, and that the students is okay with that, they can stay as long as they abide by the rules. But you just don't kick somebody out and say, "We don't ever want to see you again." That's not a Christian way of dealing with things. And another big issue I had with Bob Jones and some of these IFB churches and schools is there are several things that they do that to me are legally questionable. Since it's private property, like in Bob Jones, they had this rule where certain music was not allowed, and they could go around and check your dorm room. And if you had a vehicle on campus, I knew people that had a vehicle, which to me that's private property. Nobody should be allowed to go check, break in your vehicle and check to see if you have items, whether it be music or books or whatever, they find objectionable. Personally, if I had a vehicle and somebody from the administration broke in my car, I'd go to the cops about it. But I never heard of any cases where anybody did. I don't see how that's legal. They went into the dorm rooms of individuals, check in all their private materials, desk drawers or whatever, looking for. They did this at least every couple of months when I was there, and I don't know what they do now, but this was when I was a student over 30 years ago. I imagine they still do this. I don't know. I guess because it's private property, they can get away with it. But to me, that is really questionable. Whether that's to me, it's not right. It's not moral. Just because you have certain standards, I don't think you have music or books and stuff that they don't want you to look at. But to go through people's private property in a dorm room, to me, it's not right. And now with computers, I don't even know. I haven't talked to anybody, but they have pornography and all kinds of stuff on the computers. So maybe they have passwords and ways of checking that. But I can't imagine going to college today without having access to computer or the internet. I don't know what they do, but I'm just saying that to me it's a little ridiculous. And some of the churches the same way. Have known people who were very strict about their beliefs on certain types of music, and you know, I can understand having standards, but you have to go about this in the proper way. If you don't want your church members or your school, if you like have a school, private school, whether it's college or high school or whatever, and you have regulations about what your students are allowed to listen to, to me, it's just not something I'd want to do, is to go and check people's personal private rooms, their property, their bookcases, and go through all their personal stuff. That's an invasion of privacy. If you hear them out in the open playing music, yeah, you can catch them like that and say, I need to confiscate this because I don't approve of it. But the whole idea of just breaking in somebody's car, or breaking into somebody's briefcase or a bag or whatever, that's even if it's on school property, to me that's not right. I personally think that you probably could press the case and go to a lawyer, and probably might win a case if you took it to court. I just think that's going way too far, and it's being like having a nanny state. And they're trying to be your parent, and I'm sorry, the school is not your parent. They don't have any business saying, going that far. I understand you can have standards to say we don't want you to listen to this music or look at the particular books. And no, I don't think you should be looking at pornography or anything like that. Oh, they wouldn't even let people look at bodybuilding magazines. They're afraid they might see too much skin, which is ridiculous. But anyway, they would confiscate stuff like that too. But I mean, if this laying in the open and a dorm supervisor or another, a lot of times they had students that were involved in this, and they had students ratting on students about silly little stuff. It kind of just reminded me of being in elementary school. Students ratting on each other to tell the teacher to be the teacher's pet, and I just really can't stand that type of atmosphere. I just put up with it for 4 years because I didn't want to start all over at another school. They didn't have accreditation, so I would have had to start all over again. So I just put up with it, and it's a good thing I like classical music and Christian music and everything, because if I only could listen to rock, I would have been in trouble, because that was one of the styles of music that they wouldn't allow us to listen to. And of course, a lot of the Christian schools are in the same situation. And I could name others. I could name a bunch of different schools, but I'm not going to. Okay, there are a couple more here I want to mention. The whole issue of number 9, for instance, the group leader is always right. And that's the one thing that really upset me about Bob Jones, how they put the school's beliefs above the Bible. They would take Bible verses out of context or twist it just a little bit. Let me give you an example of that. They had a rule where guys and girls could not shake hands, and they took a Bible verse. I can't remember exactly how it was stated, but Apostle Paul said it was not good for a man to touch a woman. But I looked it up in the original language. It is not talking about shaking hands or touching. It's talking about having sex. Now they took that Bible verse completely out of context. They said that you couldn't shake hands, which I think is ridiculous. If you're going to get all horny and ready to have sex with somebody just from shaking a hand, you've got issues. Of course, I guess at that age, when you've got horny young people together, like I said, we're just trying to keep people from from you know, engaging in sexual activity. But you know, most of the time we were out in the public, so I don't think two are going to be having sex right there in front of people. So I think they really went too far, and it's really upset me that they take a Bible verses and just out of context like that. And of course, there are other churches and schools who do the same thing. A lot of these IFB churches are the same. And this cult of personality, is what I call it, is with every time we had a program, it was all about glorification of Bob Jones. I, as a Christian, only want to glorify Jesus Christ. They have these programs, and they have plastered Bob Jones' image up there, and always talking about all these things that he did and he said. They had he had certain phrases that he was famous for. They have them plastered all over the walls at that place. I'm sorry. I mean, even if I was a type of person who made quick, witty little comments, I don't want my little comments plastered all over the walls. The only thing I want on the walls, besides maybe some pretty pictures, would be some Bible verses. You know, that's being very egotistical to think that what you have to say is more important than what the Bible has to say. And I have issues with that. And there are a lot of other churches the same way. They treat their pastor like he's some sort of celebrity. I don't know, almost like meeting, you know, like maybe some heavenly being or something. I don't know, just ridiculous. It's not right. You should not treat your pastor or people in your organization should not be treated like they're superior beings or whatever. Oh, and number 10 too. The group leader is the exclusive means of knowing truth or receiving validation. No other process of delivery is really acceptable or credible. Yeah, I think a lot of times that they would ignore with the Bible, like I said, and take it out of context, their viewpoint, what I consider to be a twisted viewpoint, was gospel. And you did not, if you didn't go along with it, you were out of there. You know, if you question anything they had to say, you were considered a reprobate, and you're gone. That is not a Christian attitude to have. If you have issues with the leadership, you should be able to go as an adult and discuss these things. But to tell you the truth, a lot of these IFB churches do not consider young people to be adults. They consider anybody under 23 still a child, and they could boss them around. Well, whereas in the world, if you're 18, you could go off to war. And once you're 18, according to the government, if you commit a crime as an adult, you go to jail. And these people still up until you're, I don't know what's so magical about 23. That I had a roommate one time who was 23, and he had extra privileges the rest of us didn't have because he was considered an adult. So they have some really weird ideas about what adulthood is. And they feel like that they had the legal right to consider themselves to be your spiritual leader, and if you didn't go along with what they had to say, they would browbeat you first, make you go before a board and explain yourself, and if they didn't like what you had to say, you would get demerits, or worse, get kicked out. So I guarantee there are a lot of other schools in the IFB movement that are the same way. None of that is scriptural. They can pull out scripture out of the hat and make it try to fit whatever their twisted ideology or their twisted rule, whatever their rule is. And you know, all you have to do is do your own research, find out exactly what the verse really means. Most of the time, it's going to be completely opposite of what they're saying it means. So yeah, I've got issues with any church, group, organization, or school that twists the Bible to fit their silly rule that was not biblical, and a lot of times not even morally correct and possibly illegal. So, well, anyway, I think I pretty much covered all these. There were 10 of these. Yeah, 10 of these potential risks for participants. 10 warning signs of potential unsafe group or leader. I think that pretty much covers, they actually cover most of them. Bob Jones and this Anderson fella. Except for number 3. That's the only one that they didn't have, is a financial disclosure regarding budget or expenses. Audited. I think that they're at least, Bob Jones anyway, is at least, would at least allow somebody from the government or state or whatever to come in and audit them without any, any problems. Now, don't know how Stephen Anderson would deal with something like that if he was accused of misappropriating funds. But I imagine a lot of these churches would probably have issue with that. My church wouldn't. And most Southern Baptist churches I know wouldn't have a problem with that. But I guarantee that a lot of these IFB churches would really be angry if the government decided they wanted to come in there and check their finances to make sure that they weren't misappropriating funds. But that's because people that have a problem with that are usually misappropriating funds. They're usually stealing from the church. But anyway, I don't want to continue ranting on and on. But thank you for listening to my my program today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And remember, if you leave comments, please be respectful. Anything that has any dirty language, or if you say anything nasty to me or any of my subscribers, you will be blocked and your message removed. Have a wonderful day. God bless.